You're listening to Crossroads Church with Pastors Marcus and Natalie Avalos. The following message was recorded live at our Sunday morning services. For more information, go to www.crossroadsc.com or visit us in one of our Sunday morning services at 8:30, 10, and 11:30. And now prepare your hearts as we receive this morning's message.
How's everybody? Well, thank you for that thunderous response. How is everybody? Good. This service is interesting because at 9:58, there's nobody here. And then everybody just kind of shows up when we turn the lights on. It's pretty interesting. So, hey, we're so glad to have you with us this morning. I'm Joel, and we're continuing our series on the book of Ecclesiastes, which happens to be my favorite book of the Bible. And today you are in for a treat because today we're covering Ecclesiastes 3, which happens to be my favorite chapter of my favorite book of the Bible. And I think that if you can take home what we get today, it can literally change your life. But I want to tell you first a story about, I heard a story about a guy, and he walked out his front door one morning. He looked around, and he looked down on right in front of his front door on the porch, and he saw a little snail. He said, oh my goodness. He reached down and grabbed the snail, and he looked at it, and he pitched it across the yard and went on with his day. And a year passed, and that same guy, he was hanging out, and he hears a knock at his door. And he's like, what in the world? It's a very soft knock. So he goes out and he opens the door, and he looks around, and there's nobody there. But then he looks down, and there's a snail, the snail, and the snail looks up and goes, what was that all about? How many of you have had a season of your life that as you look back, you feel like that snail? You go, what the heck? Why did that have to go down that way? Maybe it's a relationship you were in, and you're just like, what was that all about? Or maybe it was a season of life where it's just a financial struggle, and you just look back and you go, you feel like that snail. It's like, God, I was serving you, and everything was going good, and then all of a sudden, it's like you picked me up and threw me across the yard, and it took me a year to recover back to where I was before. Anybody ever felt that way? Yeah, okay, so let me tell you about the craziest snail year of my life. It was 9 months that I spent living south of the border. So I had just had a vision, a dream of mine come true that I had for years wanted to take people on outdoor adventures around the world. And I had gotten married about 2 years earlier, and it looked like the door had finally opened. God had put me in connection with some folks that were going to help me start this organization. We were going to start leading outdoor adventure trips around the world. And I was on cloud nine because it was a miraculous way that this happened. So in my mind, I'm going in this direction to start doing these outdoor adventures. And right in the middle of that, I get a phone call from my friend David. David calls, he says, hey, Joel, my wife and I, they were mentors of mine, we feel like after 10 years of our ministry here in Mexico, we're supposed to move back to the U.S., and we feel like you're the guy that's supposed to take over our ministry here. And I said immediately, no, that is not my calling, man. Because let me tell you, David lived in the most violent city in Mexico. It's Acapulco. It's incredible amounts of drug violence. He lived down there, and he lived in the most violent neighborhood in the most violent city. And he got street cred in this neighborhood. So a little bit about this neighborhood, like the grandmother next to him, little old lady grandmother, she was the drug dealer in the neighborhood. And the guy that lived next to her had killed 2 girls. Like the whole neighborhood knew it, left their bodies on the soccer field, but he got away with it because he paid off the cops. This is our neighborhood, right? Our great neighborhood, But David had gotten street cred in the neighborhood because he got into a fight with the head of the gang and had him in a chokehold on the ground in front of the entire neighborhood. The whole neighborhood thought David, the missionary, was going to kill this gang leader. And so all of a sudden, people are like, whoa, David's a bad missionary. And now, that's David. David's like 6'6", monstrous dude. And then there's me. And I'm a lover, not a fighter. And I'm skinny, skinny little white guy. And so David, he worked in that neighborhood. I was not the right fit. So I'm like, David, I am not the right fit for this. And he said, I know, I get that. We kind of feel like maybe you're not the right fit too, but we keep feeling that the Lord has told us to ask you to do it. So he just kept hounding, well, what do you think if we did this? And I said, David, no. And so finally I was tired of the conversation. I was like, no, I'm going to be an outdoor adventure leader. So I pulled out the Christian trump card, which is, let me pray about that, brother. That's what you ever, if you're new to the Christian world, if somebody asks you to do something you just really don't want to do, and you want to sound super spiritual, you just tell them, let me pray about that, brother or sister, right? We know now if you tell us you're not going to work in kids, we know what's up, right? So I went on with my life. 2 weeks later, David calls me again. He's like, hey, bro, what'd you hear? Like, about what? He's like, dude, did you pray? I was like, dang it. I said, David, you don't follow up when somebody says, I'll pray about it. That means leave me alone, right? So then he asked me, he says, well, what did Emily think? And I hadn't actually told Emily because I knew she would actually pray about it. So, long story short, we ended up in Mexico. And I did not want to be there. It didn't feel like a right fit for my personality and what we were doing. I just didn't. Anyway, so we get down there. We're doing this ministry. We get robbed within the first few months. Like our whole house cleaned out. That's a whole story in itself. Anyway. And then we got threatened by the leader of the most bad dude in town. He threatened us because we did something he didn't like. And so we were holed up in our house for days. And people were telling us, the gang's about to do something bad to you. And anyways, so this was my life. Like the whole 9 months, I was angry and afraid. Like the whole 9 months. It's like that's my two emotions, anger and fear, the whole 9 months. And then, after 9 months, we and the board decide that the ministry just needs to close down. So after 9 months of living there, of anger and fear, we closed down the ministry, gave everything away, and we moved back to the U.S. unsure what we were going to do next. Cool story, huh? I look back at that season, and it was my snail moment. I go, what in the world? Because I look back, and I don't see that we made any kind of an impact in that village, that town. In fact, it's gotten more violent since we left. I feel like it was, in some ways, it's like, it just showed me how incredibly angry I am. I was so angry all the time, and I was like, what is the value of this? Why did we do this? I felt like that snail, like, God, I was trying to obey you, but this is a horrible experience. And anyways, that's my story. Here's the thing I know about you guys. You've got a season like that too. Somewhere in your life that as you look back, you go, man, I do not want to live that one over again. In fact, maybe when you tell your story, maybe it's a shameful season of your life that you just say, when you're telling your story, you skip over that part. People are like, tell me about the last 10 years of your life. And you're like, da-da-da, and then this, and you're like, and then they ask what happened there. Oh, some stuff. And then you move on, right? And there's these seasons of our life where we look back, maybe it's a relationship where you're in, you're like, I wish I never would have been at the bar that night to meet that guy. Or maybe, whatever it is, it's a season that you look back and say, I just wish that wouldn't happen. Or maybe it's a season where you say, man, God, I was doing my best to follow you, and then you did this, and nothing came of it. Like, what was the point of that? And we've all got those seasons. And a lot of us would say this about that season. I never want to go back there. I never want to go back into a job like that. So anybody offers me a job relatively close to that world, I say, no, I don't ever want to go back to a job like that. Maybe it's a relationship you were in. Who knows what it is? Maybe it's a financial, you remember that time that you're really tight, that season really tight, and so you work really hard now to make sure you're never financially short on money. And you say, I never want to go back to that season. We've all got one of these in our lives, a season of time that came and went, and we just don't want to go back there. But here's the interesting thing. We've also got a season where we say this, man, if I could just go back there. Maybe in your marriage, you're saying, man, I remember when we were married, we were young and in love, everything was so easy. It was just we got along so well. We were always out doing adventurous stuff. And man, I wish if we could just go back there, things would be better. Or maybe you have a time in your life that's kind of an idyllic time in your life. And you say, man, if I could get back to the season when we, before we had kids. Oh man, we had it made. We could stay out all night and we could, we had money. And if I could just get back there. And so we've all got these seasons in our life, in our past, where we look at it and we just say, man, I wish I could get back there. And if I could get back there, everything would be great. And then there's other seasons where we say, I don't ever want to go back to anything close to that. And here's the thing about it is, if you've lived just a little bit of time, you start to recognize that life happens in seasons. God set up seasons, not only around us in the, I can't think of the English word, medio ambiente, the environment. What in the world was that? Sorry. What in the world? The environment, but there's also seasons in our lives that we go through. We go through these challenging times. We go through these positive times. And you have to recognize that seasons are always changing in our lives. And we're in this series right now in the book of Ecclesiastes where we study the wisdom of King Solomon. And King Solomon, he basically, in this book, he answers some of the hard questions of life, the existential questions, the questions like, what am I here for? What am I doing? What's the meaning of life? We talked the first week in Ecclesiastes 1, he uses this important line throughout the book. It says, under the sun. And we recognize that under the sun means here on earth. And we talked that first week, we said that King Solomon says, if you want to find meaning in life, it's never going to be found just looking here on earth. We get involved in all these things, trying to fix what's wrong with the world. We say maybe education's your thing. If we can just get everybody educated, the world will be a better place. Look, I totally agree that education is a good thing. Pursue education. It will make the world a better place, but it won't solve what's wrong with the world. Education just won't do it. And you say, man, poverty, we just need to alleviate poverty. And so we pour our heart and life into poverty. But here's the thing, even if we got rid of every poor person on the earth, it wouldn't fix what's wrong with the world, because the problem with the world is something bigger than what we see. And it's a sin problem. Fortunately, Jesus Christ came from outside of our universe. He came to us. He walked under the sun with us, and he resolved the conflict of what is the meaning of life, because our meaning now is connected when we find our meaning between what we're doing here on earth, the mundane, the everyday, recognizing that there's a reward that comes in eternity based on what we do here on earth. It's not a reward for Christians under condemnation. It's not heaven or hell. It's a reward. It's a reward based on what you're going to get based on what you've done here in response to God's love to you. So we talked about that the first week. Then last week, we talked about the fact that you'll never find meaning in stuff. We pursue stuff, and we say whatever it is. If I can just get it, my life will be better. If I can just get, that boat or that car or that stuff we pile up, and as soon as we get it, we think we'll be fulfilled, but that hole is still there. And this week, we're looking at Ecclesiastes 3, where King Solomon says, if you really want to understand purpose, you've got to understand that life happens in seasons. And he starts off Ecclesiastes 3 by saying this. He says, there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. Now, some of you who are over 40 are immediately thinking, this seems like a familiar song by the Byrds. To everything, turn, right? Yeah, this is straight from King Solomon. They didn't come up with those original lyrics. It's from King Solomon. King Solomon says, guys, if you really want to understand your purpose, meaning here, you've got to understand how God works in seasons. And you've got to understand there's a time for everything. There's a season for every activity under heaven. There's a time to be born. There's a time to die. He says, hey, recognize you're finite. You're going to be born one day, and eventually one day you are going to pass away. So recognize that reality. There's a time to plant and a time to uproot. Some of them say harvest, a time to harvest. This is interesting to me too. I work with a lot of people in my coaching program. They're like, man, life's really good right now, and I'm kind of wondering when the hammer's going to fall. And I say, look, there's nothing wrong with life being good if you've been planting good seeds, because what you reap, you're going to sow, or what you sow, you'll reap, or however that goes. You're going to get what you plant. And if you've been planting good seeds, you can expect some good times, right? So enjoy the good times. Reap the harvest right now, because there will be a time where it's time to plant again. And it's not going to be as time. So enjoy the good times. And sometimes we get stuck here, and I'm this way. Maybe it's harvest time. We start to reap some of the benefits of what we've planted, and we're like, oh my gosh, when's the hammer going to fall? Things are way too quiet and good around here, right? And there's a time to harvest what you've been planted. There's a time to kill. There's a time to heal. Listen, guys, there's some times where God gives you a season of life where he says, it's time to kill that thing that's been controlling you. He gives us these windows of grace. Maybe it's time to kill that addiction. Maybe it's time to end that relationship you know is toxic and isn't healthy, right? There are some times that stuff's just got to end, and he gives us seasons of grace where he says, this is a moment where I'm going to give you that you can take care of this with an extra amount of grace. And if we miss it, though, we can miss the grace God's given us to walk in that. But there's a season for that, and there's a time to heal. There's a time to tear down and a time to build. There's a time to weep and a time to laugh. It's an interesting one here. In our society, we talk oftentimes about the stages of grief. And because they're called stages, we think about it as being kind of linear, where it's like, click, click, click. Oh, I'm over it. Mom died, but I'm fine, right? That's not how grief works. In many cultures, they give a year or 2 years to grieve, an entire season to grieve, because grief isn't linear, okay? It doesn't work like, click, oh, I'm in this stage, I'm in this stage. It's more like a spiral, right? So when the event first happens, the next morning you'll wake up and you'll feel the pain of the loss just as bad as if it happened that day. And then maybe a couple days will pass and you'll wake up and you'll feel it again, right? But the spiral gets wider and wider, but it'll come back around. And here's the thing. You may wake up a year, 2 years from now feeling the loss of what was taken from you, just as painful as the day it happened. And a lot of times we think, what's wrong with me? I should be over this by now. And your friends may say that. You should be over this by now, right? But the fact is grief is a spiral, and there are entire seasons sometimes where we just have to recognize what we lost, and it's okay to do that. Now, if it becomes debilitating where you're literally not able to function, you need to get some help on that. But a lot of times what is just basic grief in our society, we're like, move on, get on, move along. It's time to move along, and there needs to be sometimes an entire season to grieve, a time to mourn, a time to dance. At some point, you need to pick yourself up and say, you know what? I'm going to rejoice in what God's given me. I'm not going to mourn anymore. There's a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search. Sometimes you just got to give up. Sometimes there's times you just got to look at the reality of things where they are and just say, you know what? It's time to give this up, right? The time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent. That'll preach. And a time to speak, right? How many times on Facebook should people just maybe just... But then there's also a time, maybe it's time you got to speak up. Maybe there is a time you got to speak up sometimes. And you got to have a spirit-led life here to know, because sometimes you just need to be quiet when you think you want to speak, and sometimes you need to speak when you don't want to say anything because you know it's going to cause conflict, right? There's a time for it. You got to understand the seasons. There's a time to love. There's even a time to hate. There are some things in this life we should hate, y'all. There's a time for war and a time for peace. And there are also a time sometimes that you've just got to say, this is a season where I'm doing war for what I believe is right. Maybe you need to make war for your family in prayer. You say, I'm sick of this. We're done. This is not going to continue in our family, and I can't do anything physically to change it, but man, I am spiritually going to get on my knees and I'm going to make war in the heavenly places because our family is we're not going to take this anymore, right? Sometimes you just got to stand up and you got to fight. But it all happens in seasons. And there's a time to fight, and there's a time to stop fighting, right? And we've got to recognize that it happens in seasons. So here's what I take from this entire Ecclesiastes 3. What I think King Solomon's saying is this. It won't always be this way. Now listen, if you can lock this into your head, when I realized this a few months ago, it changed my life. Recognize this. It won't always be this way. Seasons come and seasons go. Now there's a positive and a negative side to this. For example, this week has been really rough at the Malm household. My daughter has been sick. She's been super sick. So last Saturday it started. Emily missed last Sunday, Mother's Day. She's home caring for our daughter because our daughter is sick. And she's waking up like every 45 minutes to an hour, it seems like, at night. And so we're just up all night. We're not getting any sleep. And I had to say this to myself a couple times. You know what? It won't always be this way. She's going to get better. And it's going to be all right. And she's going to sleep again. But then I also said it this way. When she would curl up with me at 1 a.m. next to me and push up against me, I'd have to go, oh man, it won't always be this way. There's going to be times when she's going to get a little older and she'll be like, Dad, do not touch me in public, right? Don't put your hands on me. I know it's coming, right? It won't always be this way. And so we recognize that because seasons are changing, it's not always going to be this way. So you say, man, I'm sick of my kids. Hey, listen, I know the days are long, but the years are short. Okay? And recognize, yes, it's not always going to be this way. There's going to be some days where you're going to look back and go, man, I wish my kids were here to annoy me. It's so quiet around here, right? It won't always be this way because seasons are always changing. So in light of that, here's what you got to do. Be present. Be here right now. Because here's what happens. It's so hard to be present, isn't it? When things are hard, noise, chaos, the kids, sickness, whatever it is, the struggle. What tends to happen is we either want to go backwards or forwards. In fact, there's a guy named Philip Zimbardo, and he wrote a book called The Time Paradox. And you do not need to read it. It's like 400 pages too long, and I'm going to pretty much summarize the whole book right here, okay? So this guy, he did all this research, and he found that people look at time in 6 different ways. They look at, they process in their brain the way time and seasons pass. And the first group is what's called the past positive group, okay? Past positive is people that they look at the past, and it's very rosy, idealistic feelings they have about the past. Not because they're looking at individual things from the past, but they just have a general good feeling about the past. So right now, there's this huge genre of fiction books called Amish fiction. Did you know this existed? The Amish fiction, if you go, it's books about people living in this Amish society where everything's just supposedly really simple. It's these days of yore, where all the families around dinner every night, and they make their own food and stuff. And I was talking to a publisher about it, and I said, he's looking for Amish fiction. I was like, well, I don't write that. And he goes, man, we sell zillions of those books. I said, why? And he said, well, because society has gotten to the point where there's a lot of women that are just like, why can't we go back to a simpler time? Like, I just want to go back to a simpler time. And he says they forget that simpler time, everybody had tuberculosis and was churning their own butter. And, but in the mind, if you're past positive, you look back and say, everything back in the old days was so wonderful. Back when things were that way. King Solomon warns about this in Ecclesiastes 7. He says, we're not going to get to that in this series, but he says, don't ask why were the former days better than today? For it's not from wisdom that you ask that. It goes nowhere good when you're always like, why can't we be like it used to be? It doesn't go anywhere good, right? So there's the past positive, and then there's the past negative. These are the people who have interpreted what have happened to them in the past, and it's just all negative, right? So they're always kind of paranoid about where things are going because everything's based on that one bad experience in the past. Then there are the people who live negatively in the present and what's called present hedonistic. Hedonism is living for pleasure. And these are the people that say, eat, drink, and be merry. We're going to die tomorrow, right? So there's no big, we're just going to live it up. We're going to, we got 24 hours to get as toasted as we can, and we're just going to live it, right? You know people like this. That's what we're going to do. We're just going to live for what's in front of me right now. I heard somebody just whispering, a family member. Then there's what's called the present fatalistic. Now, this one's fascinating to me because present fatalistic people, because of what's happened to them in their life, they've decided they're going to live for now, and they don't see any connection between what they do today and what's going to happen to them in the future. They've actually it's fatalistic. It's what's called learned helplessness in psychology. We are actually not born helpless. Helplessness is something we learn. It's actually been proven scientifically. So if you feel helpless, get some help. But I'm just kidding. But helplessness is something we actually learn. It's been proven that you can actually regain a sense of ability to take care of yourself. But it learned helplessness, I didn't tell this to the first service. This is bonus material. There's actually a study done where they took these rats, and rats are really good swimmers, right? And the rats can swim for hours and hours and hours. And they took these rats and they would hold them, a certain group of them, until they stopped fighting. And they would just hold them and hold them and hold them until the rats finally just gave up and surrendered hope. And then they threw them in the water with all the other rats. The rats that had been held until they were forced to stop fighting, they drowned like twice as fast as the ones, and it's a violent, brutal experiment, but they drowned faster than the ones who had never been held and forced down. So helplessness is actually a learned thing. And people who live in this present fatalistic, they often feel like, I'm helpless to change my situation. There's nothing I can do. So they stay living there, not focused anyway in how the future could be affected by that, right? Then there's these people. This is me. I am constantly living in the future. I have a hard time being present. I'm always thinking about plans, like what are we going to do next spring? And my daughter's like, Dad, dance with me. And what I have to do is recognize I'm focused over here, but man, my daughter's in front of me right now. And so many times we do this, if we're planners, we're always planning what's ahead for what's our marriage going to look like, what's our finances going to look like. And we forget to recognize what's in front of us right now and be present and enjoy it. Now, here's what's interesting about this study, and this is where I'm going with this whole thing. As he did this study, he found that there was a unique difference in people who had a religious affiliation and believed there was something in the afterlife. He had to create a unique category for them. It's something called the transcendental future. And he said, when people believe that there's something on the other side of life, they actually live differently. They actually believe that what they're doing right now in their mundane, everyday life is actually having an impact on something to come. And he had to develop a unique pattern or a unique category for them called the transcendental future way of living. And isn't that interesting? Because really, here's the thing about the transcendental future. It's based on this thought. Every season is preparation. And I believe that as Christians, we need to recognize this. God is working something great in our lives. And oftentimes it's behind the scenes. You can't see it. Just because nothing's happening doesn't mean nothing's happening. God is always working. And He's working in every season of our lives. And whatever you're going through right now, good, bad, or ugly, maybe you're in that snail season where you're like, when is this going to end? What is this about? You're trying to just get back to ground zero where you started from, right? Listen, God is working something in you, and every season you're in is preparation for what God has ahead for you. So you've got to recognize, it's the tendency to live in the future, right? Maybe you want to go future. Or maybe you're in the past, and you're saying, man, if I could just get back there. And a lot of people do that. They get hung up in what used to be, and they're trying to get back to what used to be. And if you're in that place right now this morning, you're saying, yeah, I'm a past person. Let me just quote the words of a famous philosopher named Elsa from the Disney movie Frozen. You're never going back. The past is in the past. So let it go. Let it go. Let it go, right? It's time to stop trying to get back to what used to be and focus on what is. Man, your marriage, you may never get back to that time of where, we were just so in love. And listen, your marriage has matured. It's in a different place, and embrace where it's at and lean into that instead of always going, why can't you be the way you used to be? Listen, we all grow. We all change. We're all growing, right? Focus on where you are right now and embrace what is happening right now, because what's happening right now is preparation for your future. And never forget this. There's a blessing and a burden for every season. Even right now, if you're going through this hard time, if you look around, you can find the blessing. You look back at the past and you say, man, that time was horrible. That whole season was horrible, but I guarantee there was some good stuff that happened in it. Recognize that. There's a blessing and a burden for every season. So here's the thing. Lean into the blessing and shoulder the burden. That is how you'll get the most out of the present. Recognizing it's not always going to be this way. But I know that God is working something. And if I can lean into this season and learn as much as I can for it, it's all preparation. Every season is preparation. So I'm going to embrace the blessing. There's a blessing in your life right now if you'll focus on it. And I'm just going to shoulder that burden, whatever it is, man. The kids are wearing you out, but man, isn't it great to have them? Focus on the blessing of it. Finances maybe aren't where you want to be, but man, hey, at least you're not living on the street. If you are living on the street, check with us. But at least you're not living on the street. At least God's provided a place for you to live, right? There's a blessing and a burden. And this is where King Solomon wraps it up. And I love this in Ecclesiastes 3:11. He says this, 3:11. He says, God has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, but no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. Here's a promise I can make to you. Whatever season you're in right now, whatever season you've gone through, God is making something beautiful out of your life. That's what he does. He makes beautiful things. And he wants to make something beautiful out of your life. And everything you've gone through, here's the crazy thing about it. Even the seasons you got thrown into because of your own dumb mistakes, if you'll let him, he can take that season and make it preparation for something great he has for you. He can even take it and turn it into something absolutely beautiful that he uses to bring himself glory and bring you joy. But you've got to embrace where you are right now, embrace what's happened to you, and lean into where you are right now, recognizing it's not always going to be this way. For good, right? Like one of these days, you're going to come into a good season again. I promise it. I promise it. If you're grieving right now, don't worry. You will come out the other side. Hold on. And if things are really good right now, hey, don't worry. It won't always be this way. They'll get bad again, right? Another Joel Osteen moment. Hey, he's made everything beautiful in its time. He's set eternity in the human heart, and you can't even fathom what he's doing in your life. You literally, if you will let God take control of your life, embrace where he's got you right now, learn what you need to learn right now, you can't fathom where he wants to take you. I say that in my life myself. I look at where we're living, what we're doing right now, and I'm just like, is this real? Can this really happen? Right? And there's some challenges in this season. There's a burden in this season too right now. But there's blessings, and you're gonna end up places where you're going to say, man, God, I can't believe this is possible. He can do things in your life you cannot even fathom. I know that there's nothing better for people than to be happy and do good while they live. Live in this moment. Be happy in this moment. That each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. This season you're in right now is a gift from God. It won't always be this way. There's greater and better things ahead. But if you'll embrace what he has for you right now, there's something great to be learned. And it's preparation for what's ahead. The path of the righteous is like the light of dawn. It shines brighter and brighter. So you can count on the fact that what you're getting right now, the hard, ugly stuff and the good stuff, it's all preparation for what's ahead. If you just lean into it and be present. Be here. Stop living in the past. Stop focusing so much on the future. Be right here. Live right here. He's got something for you. You guys receive that? Let me pray for you. Father, we thank you so much that you have a plan and a purpose for us. I thank you that every season of our lives, you are always working behind the scenes, even when we don't see it. You are always working. One touch of your favor can change everything in an instant. Lord, we just lean into that and we want to be present, just receive your work that you're doing in us right now.
Thank you for listening to Crossroads Church. We trust this message enriched your life in some way. For more information, visit us on the web at www.crossroadsc.com. Or if you're in the area, come by and visit us on a Sunday morning at 8:30, 10, or 11:30 a.m. Crossroads Church, we're bringing a real God to real people.